So a very warm welcome today, Virtual Ops 2020 season, another great session with a guest speaker from the United States, Gary Bush from Zulu Airline Systems. My name is Daniel Stecher. I'm your host today from IBS Software, Vice President Airline Operations. And before we start, I suggest that we are doing a short introduction round that everybody here in this call knows who else is in the call. So let's start, ladies first, with Christine from Canada.
Good morning from Canada. I'm in Montreal, Quebec. It is getting colder here too, which is a huge bummer because it's been such a great summer. But this is what we do. We have to move on, right? With the seasons and everything else. I spent almost 2 decades with Air Canada until very recently. I am very passionate about the subjects I know a lot about. So just forewarned, when I start talking later, you might have to give me the sign to be quiet. Gary, I'm very excited to hear your presentation, and on to the next one.
Now we go to Kenya. Esther.
It's afternoon in Kenya. Esther here from Kenya Airways, manager crew scheduling. Yep, glad to be here.
Good. Let's go to United States. Evan.
Hi, everyone. Evan Bookbinder. I'm from Arizona, where it never gets cold. And I've been in about two decades now in the in and around the airline business. Also very excited to be here.
Dean Snyders, please.
Sorry, let me put this on. Hi, everyone. Dean Snyders from Cape Town. I'm a startup airline from Cape Town, so welcome and hi.
Eva Zabogal. Eva, can you hear us?
Hi, I am here. I am from Colombia. Well, I am really now in. I don't know how to say when on a standby in a Colombian airline, but I am very glad to join the webinar.
Simon.
Good afternoon, Simon Brown, Head of IT Architecture Operations at Heathrow. It's the first time attending one of these webinars, conferences organised by Daniel, so pleased to join you. My background, I spent 20 years in aviation. First 17 years of that was in NATS, Air Traffic Control in the UK, and joined Heathrow in 2017. And I've got responsibility for all of the airside and operations IT infrastructure.
Yusuf. Yusuf, you are muted.
Apologies for that. I didn't realize that. Hello, everybody. Jumbo to Esther. And I just want to say hello from Dallas, Fort Worth, where it's raining a lot. Evan, you used to live here, so maybe you remember the big thunderstorms that we used to have. And looking forward to Gerald's presentation.
So before Gary is introducing himself and the topic, just some information about the logistics. Simon mentioned webinar. This is exactly not a webinar. So everybody from you who were already in the virtual happy hour knows the concept and the format. First of all, we are closed shop, so we have a limited amount of attendees. And that gives also everybody from you speak and FaceTime. And that's the next new thing or different from a webinar style. You can raise your hand. That's a functionality here in Teams, but you can also just start asking questions because we really want to foster a dialogue. So everybody will have his question answered. It's not that the moderator or somebody else is just picking some of the questions. We want to really answer all your questions. So now the stage is yours, Gary.
No, thanks, Daniel. Appreciate the invitation to participate. My background is actually from the consulting world, and I met Kevin Woods, who founded Zulu Airline Systems, when I was consulting at Delta Airlines in the decision support area. My background really is decision sciences. So Daniel, I've been quite impressed by your virtual networking activities during the pandemic. I think it's a great way to stay connected, and it's been very interesting for everyone to participate. Thank you. And we certainly appreciate for the virtual ops sessions to look upstream to the planning functions for a discussion on the innovations that might make life easier for the OCC and other ops and crew and maintenance groups. So
what
yeah,
are you seeing now? You were just seeing the slides. You are just seeing the slides, or you are also seeing the team's front end on my side?
I can see the slides and the people who are still projecting. I can see your photo. Yeah.
Okay, wait, then I have to change this here. Hopefully. Now it's better, isn't it? Now you just see the PowerPoint?
Yes, and well, at the underneath, I can see who's attending.
Oh yeah, exactly. That's exactly how it should be.
Yep. Good. Yep. No, that works fine. Good. Yeah. So maybe you can go, excuse me, to the next slide. We interviewed probably 50 or more different planners and schedulers to get a picture of how they view their work. And I guess it's no surprise that scheduling is a complex problem with multiple decisions, what markets, what frequency, what time of day, what gauge, etc. And especially today, there's a lot of uncertainty that has to be dealt with. There's always been the uncertainty on market stimulation for new markets, but today even the PDU is quite an uncertainty until close to operation. And fares, which competitors are flying what capacity today, the costs, etc. And of course, schedulers more and more are trying to take the constraints into account as schedules are created. Aircraft capabilities, what aircraft are available, airports with all the various constraints of minimum ground times, international to international, so regulatory as well as physical constraints, and as much as possible, the crew rules and maintenance and ops concerns, so that they can be integrated into a robust schedule that meets regulatory requirements, is operationally feasible, and is optimally profitable. So I'd be interested if the participants kind of agree with this picture of the planning and scheduling problem, or if they have other things to add or question. No comments? Okay, maybe we can hit the next slide then, Daniel. Now, traditionally, what we've been told is, and what we've seen is seasonal planning really had a strong forecasting focus, relying on historic data. Even with the variations, passenger demand was actually quite predictable in most markets, for the time of day even and day of week. And so a schedule could be created quite early on using the calibration of historic data and forecast tools, blended with the historic slots that an airline may have and any other network plans and the available fleet into a proposed schedule that often the network planning group would hand to the scheduling group, and they would create it in the schedule system. over the next few weeks and months, if you can click forward, Daniel, there's a series of meetings quite often with other groups to be sure that the concerns and the constraints and that the schedule meets, let's say, the operations and maintenance requirements, crew pairings, etc. And then, depending on the IATA schedule, the slots would then be the slots team would get involved and request slots that were new or changed from what the historics were. And this schedule then, of course, would be published in whatever PSS distribution system the airline may have, and for sale. And as the demand picked up, a few months before the day of operation, then the final crew rostering and OCC plans would be locked down, and the schedule pretty much finalized. Daniel, if you could click one more, the only flexibility that most airlines had at this point, or the primary tools available to execute that balancing act of demand with capacity, was primarily revenue management, to have price buckets so that the flights that were heavily booked, of course, would become very expensive. The ones that were lightly booked would be some lower fare buckets would remain open until it got closer to a higher load factor. There, of course, for some airlines is a close-in refleeting capability to put high demand aircraft, high demand flights on perhaps larger aircraft and vice versa. But those were really the primary areas of flexibility to the demand as it became better known. And given the length of time this whole process required, and the limited flexibility to capture commercial opportunities to improve profitability, not a lot of dynamic schedule changes could be done. Once the crew, let's say, was locked down and the OCC plans were created. So this was kind of the problem that even before COVID, if we want to click to the next slide, a lot of LCCs and some fast-growing smaller and mid-sized carriers were trying to find a way to be more flexible with their scheduling closer to the day of operation when their demand became better known and clarified. So most of them had operations designed for operational efficiency, but they really wanted the flexibility to capture commercial opportunities. And the innovations they talked about for network planning, Daniel, if you want to click forward, really were around how to use the current booking data, what the competition might be doing, or the anticipated competitive response, what new market restrictions were out there, to make fairly major demand-driven adjustments to the schedule. And of course, during COVID and even now, probably for some time, this has actually become somewhat the de facto way of planning, where major changes are being made well after the time frame that the schedule used to be fairly locked down.
I have a question. Yesterday we had a conversation about the new not normal and the new mindset, and the saying was that especially the low-cost airlines are very innovative and innovation drivers. You were also mentioning that some of the low-cost airlines are here trying out some new mechanism. Is there not any sample of an so-called legacy airline or traditional airline which is also trying to use demand-driven scheduling?
There are. I think before COVID, it was primarily the LCCs that felt that need. But we've found actually since March, after airlines were kind of over the survival mode and had a sense that they needed to figure out how to make money in some way and to rebuild to a stronger operation, they were looking for ways to innovate. And for example, one that we're working with was asked, they had quite a conflict where the commercial group kept wanting to make fairly major changes in the schedule, and the maintenance group was trying to lock things down because they had their maintenance plans and they had the rotation set up so that the aircraft were at the right airports at the right frequency for line maintenance. So rather than continue to try to do it through meetings, someone at a VP level actually said, well, why don't we give the maintenance rotation problem to the scheduling group and have them figure it out there. So this is an example of kind of the breaking down of silos and the integration. And with a kind of an intelligent rotation optimizer, we were able to take those rules into account and fairly quickly create rotations that matched what the needs were by the maintenance group. And we're continuing to look for, of course, we've done it with other problems as well, and are finding more and more larger carriers that are seeing that gap in their capabilities, given the short time frame they have with all the schedule changes.
Christine,
Gary, may I ask a quick question?
With the towing aircraft and the 10-minute change in the schedule, do you remember? You were giving the sample. Maybe you want to repeat this because I think that's also a nice use case how a schedule change, which is isolated, is then causing a huge trouble on the day of ops.
Yes, thank you, Daniel. Actually, I wanted to ask first, out of curiosity, out of managing organizational change, how did the maintenance group handle relinquishing control of the maintenance schedule to the planning group? I'm curious about, or schedulers, sorry.
Yeah, and that's a general problem, Kristen. And I have a section of the presentation to talk specifically about that. But in this case, the maintenance group was only too happy to have the problem taken off their hands. Instead of continuing to fight with the scheduling group and network planning.
Well, that's great. I mean, I firmly believe in, and my background was in maintenance, and specifically with regulatory and non-regulatory processes, interbranch processes. And I'm glad to hear maintenance relinquish control easily, because some people can be a little bit protective about their world. But I believe that if one group is struggling, they were struggling obviously to schedule things. So if another group says, wait, I have an idea, let me just give this a shot. You see what it looks like. If it doesn't work, we'll scrap it. We'll do it again. We should relinquish control, because whoever has the brightest idea in the room, especially during a time, when they're scrambling after COVID to figure out what to do, we just need to move forward. So, and my example, so we built an end-to-end process at Air Canada, and it examined every single player in a turn, in aircraft turn. And at one point, line maintenance realized that they had 10 minutes taken away during a period where they had to get the aircraft from line maintenance hangar overnight to the gate. And they had, let's say, an hour at one point, and it was already really tight with an hour. They had 10 minutes taken out of the schedule by network planning. Network planning had no idea what impact, I don't think they would have an idea. Otherwise, they perhaps would have discussed it with them, what impact it would have. And I learned then that when you're on the apron waiting to go from the hangar to your gate, you do not have priority. Who has priority are the aircraft that are about to hit a runway. So it started to cause delays. And this particular flight was a critical flight because it had a lot of connecting passengers from YVR onto Asia. So what we did is we created a dashboard to group in all of the critical flights, those which would have commercial and operational and reputational impact going forward, to see what they could do to at least elevate the profile of those flights and show, look, this is why you need to give us back the 10 minutes. In fact, could you give me 25 because I really need that? So that's what we were talking about yesterday.
You know, I found in my consulting that Canada seems to be way ahead in terms of collaborative processes. I don't know if anybody else has noticed that, but I had one group in Calgary that, you know, everybody was just throwing ideas out, and of course, as you mentioned, the best idea in the room eventually came to the surface and was implemented. I had a similar project, and I won't mention which country, but everybody sat on their hands and waited for the boss to say what he wanted to do. And so not always the best ideas get implemented in that way. But Yusuf, it looks like you have your hand up.
Yes, Gary, I have a question for you. My experience in the last few months has been that some of the airlines were forced into this new way of thinking because they shifted from a focus on passenger traffic to freight traffic, and freight had to be done in a demand-driven way. Also, they had to do repatriation flights, stuff like that. Do you have any comment on that?
Yeah, certainly that is more real time. I think freight actually shows up almost similarly to the way passengers are now booking flights. So I think it's happening concurrently. You know, and my kind of cartoonish curves on the top of the slide try to show that the uncertainty early on now about what passengers are going to actually be booking on the flight is much higher, and it appears early on that most of the flights are not going to be profitable, and not until very late in the process, because similar to freight, people are booking their flights now when they know the airport's going to be open at their destination. They know they're going to have a place to stay, etc. So how long that's going to last, who knows? But I think what having these kind of tools and having this willingness to integrate work process and data flow is just going to make it more profitable for airlines to delay locking down decisions and being able to capture more of that economic value, whether it's freight or passengers. Yeah.
Well, they do have to lock down the decisions, but they have to be flexible. They have to be, you know, set in stone in the PSS, but then able to be modified to losing my words this morning. Sorry, people. To meet any requirement. And I think COVID has definitely showed the airlines that they literally need to be able to spend on a dime. And in Air Canada's case, they'd had two previous ventures into the cargo business, freight only, and they were not profitable. In this case, our senior VP of operations, my former boss, said, you guys, why don't we just fill the aircraft with cargo as much as possible and then let the engineering group figure it out. And it was friggin' brilliant the way they did it. They had to, even just the loading, there's some videos online. It's pretty cool. So lock it down, but realize that you might be wrong in 24 hours or in 18 hours, because we're going to have a second wave. Schools have opened in the States. Schools are opening in Canada. Schools have opened in, across the world. So we're going to have a second wave, and they're going to need probably to put in their plans B and C. And I'm not trying to be negative, but honestly, I have been away from Air Canada for a few months now, and I just told my daughter, I love this business because it's so exciting, and the changes that you can make can impact so many people's lives so quickly. So it's a delicious problem to have. It really is. It's a terrible reason to have it, but it's a fantastic puzzle to have to solve it.
Yeah, I tried to get away from the airline industry twice myself, and it's infectious, though. It keeps bringing you back. Yeah, so good. Well, maybe we can go to the next slide, and I can talk through some of the kind of tools that we've looked at to enable this. I think way upstream, some of the traditional forecasting tools that airlines used to calibrate historic data traditionally did match what was actually flown, and they were predictive for a while, but of course the future reality drifted away quickly, even in the more stable world. Of course, for new markets where market stimulation, competitive responses drive the forecast so much, those tools were not all that helpful. And today, with booking data being more of the driver, some different kind of tools needed to be thought of. So maybe Daniel, if you could click forward, the data calibration and the reliance on historic data really could be viewed and was viewed by a lot of groups as analysis paralysis and taking too much time and too much cost. And so in a number of cases, we heard that someone would just make the decision based on their instinct, getting so frustrated and perhaps impatient and needing to make decisions. What we found is that the predictive value of both of those was fairly low. I actually did an audit at a few organizations of the decisions that were made using the traditional tools, and it surprised me at first, but then it actually repeated in a few other cases where 80% of the forecasts failed to meet their promise. The instinct-driven decisions, some of them were very good, many were not so good, and so the predictive value was just as low. And what some of my background and what we're putting together as tools now to use is more around something called decision analytics, to have kind of a happy medium in terms of time required and a much higher predictive value. So Daniel, the key inputs for this, of course, every airline seems to have their own key inputs that they want to look at for forecasting flights. But the major distinction of this approach is rather than spend a lot of time on the assumptions around a forecast, then the input will look at a range of probable outcomes. And for those of you that are familiar with decision analytics, we look all the way from a 10th percentile to a 90th percentile, so which is about the range of where someone knowledgeable in the topic would say, I'd be surprised it's this low, but it could be. Or on the opposite end, I'd be surprised it's this high, but it could be that high. And so we create a distribution curve between those two. And what's surprising people after they get going with this is it's actually faster to assess the inputs for a flight than it used to be with all of the work required around assumptions and calibration and all of that. So the calculation model that's used, again, is typically unique to each airline. But after that's worked out, then what the simulation engine will do is sample from the ranges of each of these inputs. And Daniel, if you could click forward one, it will create a distribution of outcomes. And so each of these curves represents a P5 to P95 range of outcomes based on the ranges of inputs that were used. Probably a decision you could make based on this is that you would not prioritize A, but if you compare B and C, you can see that at the median level, the P50, they have approximately the same forecast. And that's pretty much all you would get from a traditional forecast approach. But with this type of decision analytic approach, you're able to see that B has less uncertainty, C has more risk, but it also has more potential upside. And then, Daniel, clicking forward again, if you can also then from the simulator get the picture of where that uncertainty is coming from. Daniel, yeah, the tornado diagram will tell you that, say for B, for example, the market share capture that you might get in a market that, let's say, has more than one competitor may be the key uncertainty. Well, with C, that might be what's at the top of the graph might be the stimulation that you can create, or how well you're able today to convince passengers to get back in the market. And depending on which you felt you had more control over, you would go with one over the other. And so the idea of these tools is not to have a black box with the answer, but it's to provide decision support for people who are knowledgeable about the operation, about the markets, to make choices, intelligent choices. And so, any questions or comments? I know I usually had about a one-day workshop to talk through what DA is, so you've gotten 10 minutes.
So have any of the airlines you've worked with, have they actually, like, the source data, where's it coming from? Are they using dashboards? Are any of them using data lakes, and then using an AI lab to run full analysis, like with B and C, to get more business intelligence out of what part along the path, from the bottom to the top of the BC scales where's the risk going to start being incurred, things like that?
Sure, and that's a part of both the input process. So for bookings, for example, we have a forecast algorithm that also uses some history, but it will come up with a distribution if that's the main data you have. If you've got a little more knowledge, there are some machine learning algorithms that can give you insight using multiple data inputs. So market sizes, for example, or what the trends have been. So on the input side, you can use a variety of tools then to come up with what you think that distribution might be. And then I think, as you're suggesting, what the sensitivity analysis allows you to do is to actually stop spending time on the uncertainties that are lower down on the graph. It's amazing how much time is wasted, for example, worrying about what the uncertainty range is on the ancillary revenue or on the costs, when you probably know those fairly well.
Yeah.
And it gives you an idea of a concept we call value of information. How much will it be worth to spend the time on the critical factors? And if a little bit more information may help you make your choice. The other concept that is useful here is something called value of control. And that is, rather than getting more information, is there some way that we could actually mitigate the downside risk of one of these uncertainties and cause the upside to happen? And so it stimulates some thinking, and very often these are where some of the most valuable insights come from.
Yusuf, you have a comment.
Yeah, so a question for Gary. Gary, this summer, as you can guess, I, based on the kind of thinking you've had, I took a course in machine learning, learned Python, because I thought I'd be doing a lot of modeling on this along this angle. But I experienced something. I experienced that some people are very resistant to this way of thinking. Did you encounter any resistance?
Oh, yes. Yeah. And I think there's a phenomenon. I'm not as familiar with getting through the machine learning barrier. is I think too much dependence on data alone does rub up against people who feel that they have a pretty good knowledge of the topic themselves. With this method, we try to use insight from whatever source it may come. So if machine learning provides some insight and somebody who's very knowledgeable in a market has other insights, the idea is to combine the instinct and the data into the range of what's possible. And there seems to be less resistance once people have experienced that. Yep, it's a good point, though. I'm glad to see that you're still a polymath and continuing to learn all new technologies. I'm sure it'll be quite useful.
We have to do it. If you don't do it, you get left behind.
Exactly. Okay. So any other questions or comments? No? Okay. Thank you, Daniel. Rather than forecast each market with precisely the wrong number, what the DA process aims to do is to help you compare your alternatives and get some insights into either what additional information would be helpful or where you may get value control then to make the choices that look to be the highest probable potential for the operation. And that's, of course, something that could be used for both new routes as well as for which routes look like you may be safe canceling or adding. And of course, the reacom analysis, if you're canceling, is another component of what needs to be considered. Gauge changes are also something that could be done in this probabilistic comparative way. So those are some of the front end tools that go into the choices while looking at the uncertainties. And then if you, yes, Yusuf, you had a question?
Gary, if this is the wrong time to bring it up, I'll defer the question. But one of the things I looked at is what is the benefit of keeping the middle seat open versus not? Did you get into that?
You know, what capacity they look at, we didn't with these particular tools. We took whatever capacity they said they might have available and did a comparative analysis of the likely, oops, lost the slides, Daniel, of the comparative value or potential of those. But I think I have in the past used this process to help organizations make complex decisions like that, where there are a lot of subjective factors at play. And it's interesting, the kind of discussion that it elicits really can be quite insightful on some things that will really matter. And more often than not, it says, well, you know what, we really have to go find out or perhaps test it. And Delta was always great at that. They said, well, you know, our models will get us so far, but let's put it out in the market and see what the response is. And they were quite willing to be flexible, you know, with routes or with product and see what happened.
Okay.
Yep. I think with masks being more and more, this is just a personal opinion now, not anything to do with this, more and more viewed as the critical safety component, distance may not be as critical if you're careful with your mask. But I know that for airlines, it's going to be essential to open up the full capacity to get back to a profitable level.
Yeah, because as you can imagine, I often, well, not often, used to get into that issue of what's the revenue if we price higher but leave 1/3 of the seats blocked? What's the revenue if we fill the plane but price lower?
Yeah. Daniel, are you able to show your slides again? Or did he
Actually,
drop?
I think we've lost Daniel. That's the problem.
Oh, I see. Okay. Wow.
Well, while Daniel's gone,
Mhm.
hang on. Oh, I'm not on mute. I was curious. I've tried to step back from the airline industry a little bit because it makes me a little sad. Air Canada implemented masks on aircraft in April. Have the FAA still not mandated masks? Are they still leaving it up to the individual airlines to manage?
I believe that's the case. I think our federal government has resisted mandating anything
Ugh,
and left it up
let's not
to
go
the
there.
states or to the
So the Canadians can't believe this, but yes, our FAA has not mandated it. It's airline policy.
That's so weird because having written a regulatory manual for 18 of my 19 and a half years, we were almost always, following up to support what the FAA had decided. So I honestly, this is the one thing that boggles my mind. I don't get it, but I'm very happy to see that I don't know if it was Delta or United. They have not just threatened people, but said no mask. No, no shirt, no shirt, no shoes, no service, no mask, no service, off you go, and no fly list. And WestJet in Canada is doing the same thing. Because the masks are mandated in Canada, I think the Canadian passengers, as small a group as they are right now, are more used to it and realize, because also end of June, Air Canada took out the middle seat empty. I mean, that was never a very great model, because if you're flying a single aisle with two seats on either side, which seat are you going to leave empty, right? But in any case, they don't fly full. And I wondered how, and Yusuf, to your point, I wondered how the decision was made to say, okay, we're going to fill that seat. But they have left it open to passengers. If you check in and you feel that, the airplane is 3/4 full and you're not comfortable flying, we will change your flight to a later flight to accommodate you, no change fee necessary. And there's been, and again, I've been staying away from the Facebook comments because they tend to be quite vitriolic, especially with regard to Air Canada. I don't know how the public's reacted to that, but it's interesting to see the US and the Canadian markets behaving so differently, and for several months in a row, actually. I mean, we're already 2 months into Air Canada filling their aircraft, and the Americans are still of the mindset, no, we're going to leave that empty seat. But I guess it must be market and revenue driven, because if they had the demand, if Delta had the demand, they would fill those seats. I mean, honestly.
Sure. No doubt. They have about 500 people on their no-fly list now.
Wow.
So they're they are being strict about it. But I agree with you that once the demand gets there, those middle seats will get filled.
Hi, Gary.
I filled the time after you disappeared.
Yeah, my Wi-Fi is, I don't know what happened. So I'm just rebooting here my machine, and I'm joining now via cell phone. It's also here now here for the virtual Ops 2020 that we have these technical difficulties here in good old Germany.
Gerald, hi, this is Sapna. I'm sorry I joined late. So
hi,
while
Sapna.
Daniel boots, hello, how are you? I just have a question while Daniel boots up. So you were talking about this probabilistic model, and you also talked about how cumbersome it is going to be to clean up the data and obtain a clean data across all those sources of data. In your probabilistic model, those challenges won't be there. I can see that your input sources had so many different departments, and the challenges that you're going to face in disparate data across those departments, you no longer will be facing in your probabilistic model?
It's a different challenge, that's for sure, Sapna. I appreciate that. It replaces, I think, the fairly long and honestly quite expensive calibration process and cleanup process, really with more of a thinking process by subject matter experts, where they can take any data available, but also other inputs that they may have in mind that they know drive the market, to come up with the ranges of uncertainty for each of the inputs. And it is more of a cross-functional process with the inputs coming from different departments. And in that way, it actually has tended to create a little bit more ownership and understanding of why certain decisions are made. One thing that I think is a first impression is, well, it's going to take longer. It actually doesn't take as long. It can be done fairly quickly because you're not as concerned about being precisely wrong or right. Maybe I should say that. You're really more interested in capturing the range of uncertainty. And for a first pass analysis to compare your options, being highly uncertain is okay. And you'll be surprised at how few of those things you think are fairly wide ranges really matter. But the ones that do, you can go back then and maybe sharpen up your thinking or use more data. So it is an iterative thought process.
Thank you. Thank you,
Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Gary and Sapna, sorry for if this is disturbing the flow, but one of the things I found out in my machine learning project that I did this summer is that it teaches you that there's some variables you're looking at which aren't really that important. And that was actually one of the biggest takeaways I had from my machine learning project, is that we look at a lot of data and we think, oh, this must all be important. And then we found out there was only 6 or 7 variables that are the really important ones, and the others really aren't that significant. So that's one advantage of the machine learning approach.
Right. And the tornado diagram does that in another way. Yeah, so the value of information is a very powerful concept to avoid unnecessary work. Whether that's done through a machine learning algorithm or through kind of a decision analytic range. Yeah, it does focus the discussion on what's really relevant.
Thanks, David. We talked about the demand side, but would you also consider some kind of, I know this is not your main topic, but was interested to understand whether looking at a future, I mean, the next steps, that is, for example, your pairings or how crew is operating, bring that back into your model and improving block hours or something. Is that a thought that's going on at airlines? A kind of feedback loop from pairings and rostering stage?
Yeah, you're actually moving on to the next slide once we see it. But what the other tools are focused on is exactly that. It's to be able to better incorporate the rules that and the constraints that you may have, whether that's looking at the capacity that you may want to consider, the different capabilities of different aircraft for certain routes, all of the issues around airports, as well as basic crew rules and of course maintenance and other ops rules. Having that in a rules engine then allows an intelligent rotation optimizer to create a schedule that will essentially be ready to fly or very close to being ready to fly. And what we've found is that you can then look at multiple scenarios and compare them for the metrics that will come out of the scheduling system to see if we actually did this with capacity and picked these markets, what kind of metrics in terms of utilization, profitability. In one group is actually trying to measure what the forecast on-time performance may be. I hope one day we get back to worrying about on-time performance, but yeah, that is really probably as much a part of the work that we've been focused on as the improved forecasting.
Gerald, yesterday in our session, we talked about, I think it was Ann Cedarhalder brought it up, customer service, customer satisfaction, customer service indicators. Have any of the models been successful in truly defining or quantifying customer service factors at the end of it, rather than just hard data? Ooh, am I echoing just for me?
I think it's through Daniel's computer.
That sounds horrible.
Oh, it looks like he's, there we go.
Oh.
So if you want to click down to number 7, Daniel.
Distracted by shiny things.
Yeah. Oops. Are you able to put it on display mode? I think he's getting to it, but you could see where you know, there's a number of tools with that arrow to the various, yeah, the next click. Thank you. Where all of the constraints are looked at in the operation, the rotations, and you know, this is where one of the things that we've tried to be quite careful with is rather than try to set up a model with everything that you wanted to solve, you know, which might take a long time to set up and a long time to run, we've designed the optimizer tools to be something any user can set up fairly quickly, like within minutes, by picking different selections, and then to run. And some of them take a few seconds, some take a few minutes. The idea being to be able to run many more scenarios and what ifs, and get feedback on you know, how close does it get to a full solution? Where are the remaining issues, so that a knowledgeable scheduler then can focus in on those remaining issues and maybe pull in the appropriate person. So for example, one group, they were able to solve their rotation almost completely, but had a couple of flights that wouldn't fit onto the available aircraft. And so they went back to the ops group and said, you know, we don't have enough aircraft with this particular mission capability. And they said, oh, well, we'll just put an over water pack on another aircraft. And, you know, by re-entering that into the rules engine, voila, all of a sudden, you know, the rotation worked and they were able to move forward. So the goal is to, again, focus in on the issues and to have kind of that human machine interface for the problem solving and the optimization, and to know what questions might be useful to actually ask other functional areas about, to see if there is a possible rules change or flexibility. Because we found that not everything's really a constraint. Some things are preferences. Or some are soft constraints, let's say. And so having tools that can home in on that and get some decisions made about that can be quite useful.
So I guess what I was trying to get at with the customer service indicator or satisfaction question was, everyone's trying to figure out what's going to make passengers feel comfortable to fly. And that would mean that ostensibly they are satisfied. So I'm wondering with any of these different models that they're running, and again, the US airlines deciding for the most part, I think, to leave the middle seat open, at what other than revenue, I guess, have there been any unexpected responses come out of these data models to show that we think perhaps our customers would feel more comfortable or more satisfied in this scenario than others? I don't know, because all of the hard data is great, but the customer service is so difficult to quantify, to measure. And I'm wondering if these models, these new ways of thinking with DA, if that will assist airlines in making those types of determinations, which are very much not based on hard data, or are based on hard data, but are a consequence at the end that you don't get to measure until you have feedback from customers and surveys and whatnot at the end.
Sure, and it really can be addressed in a couple of ways. One is for the input range that you use. So for scenario A, we may say, let's keep the middle seat open, which will give you a capacity, but it may actually change what you think your forecast bookings could be. And so that thinking may adjust your range upward. Well, what if we keep the we do open up the middle seat? Mm-hmm. Then your expert to assess the input range for bookings may say, wow, that's really going to maybe even create a downside tail. We may have the same middle value, but not much upside. So that's one way to take those subjective issues into account into these inputs, rather than being reliant just on historic data. Mm-hmm. Another way that I think far too few organizations do, and I'll show a slide later, is to learn from what actually happened and use that information then back to help the experts calibrate their ranges of input, or to find new ideas for, let's say, designs of schedules or product or whatever that may be. And for the organizations that have really taken a look at what actually happens and in a quality process way use that to continuously improve, they have just far exceeded competitors in terms of the kind of results they get. I mean, we've seen it in the auto industry, we've seen it in industry after industry. Quality concepts really do work. Kristen, does that answer your question?
It does, and I'm just thinking as a previous old timer in the industry, with I worked with a lot of people who had like less than 1 year in the company, and they would ask questions, and I would smile, and they would say, "Well, that's not going to work," and I would say, "Well, it actually did. 15 years ago, we tried this and we did this." All of this data gives you hard empirical evidence of what was tried and discarded because of what the data model said. So rather than just tribal knowledge, which, let's face it, in this industry, a lot of it's been lost now because people have retired and or been severed, right? But this data will give people empirical evidence of what we made a decision based on what the data model showed us. If you give me more data, I can run it again. But if I run it again with the same data, it's going to have the same results. So let's not waste our time. Let's move on. So right. I think these models are fantastic in so many ways, because you can just keep putting different data in, different fins, different gates, different middle seat open, middle seat not open, and just run. As long as you have it's data in, data out, right? Crap in, crap out. If you have good data, if you have robust data, you can figure out anything with these models. These are brilliant.
Boy,
may I add a point?
I'm glad you invited Kristen today.
And may I say that it's very early in the morning here, so it's a little, yeah.
Okay.
I told you at the beginning, you have to warn me. You have to just somehow Daniel has to figure out how to mute me or something.
All good. Please go on.
So I have a data point which is not professional but personal, and it's early for us too. But I have caffeine to keep me going. one of the things I found out is that depending on the market, depending on the kind of airline, there's sometimes lessons you can relearn, and sometimes there's lessons that are completely new. But I'll give you a personal example. My mom was in Pakistan when the crisis hit, needed to get her home in a hurry. And what we did is I went to Qatar Airways. I said, I don't care how much it costs, but I need to get her in a Q suite coming to Dallas. So she'll be sitting in a comfortable cabin with a door that can close, so nobody comes close to her if she's not comfortable doing it. And I paid $5,000 for that, because that is, for me, very valuable. And now what they're finding is, airlines like Qatar Airways are finding, is that what used to be the business travelers kind of ticket is now what people are paying, where they think, I want to be isolated from everybody, I want my private cabin, I will pay that much to fly. No business travelers getting on a plane, but privately people are doing it. But on the flip side, I'm looking at going to Florida in October, if it's safe enough. And Evan, sorry for saying this, but on American Airlines, I found a round trip ticket for $110. For $110, I'll sit in the back with everybody else with my mask on. So I think even the traveling public is showing some flexibility with the right price point, and depending on the market, sometimes I'll pay $5,000 and sometimes I'll pay $110. It really depends on where you're going in the market, and we're relearning new things or learning new things as we go along. But the airlines that have the product that gives you the isolation, they're commanding a premium for it and getting it. And the airlines that have capacity to dump, they're packing it in with low fares. That's my observation.
Wow.
It's driving the revenue management group nuts. This whole new world. Yeah, and I think that's where actually using some of the knowledge of what's happening, and it's changing every day in a range type of model, gives you the ability to say, well, what kind of difference might it make? Let's explore it. The key is to be able to, I think, as Kristen was saying, put those inputs in and run it quickly to get the results, instead of something that takes forever. And that's been one of the goals.
And it might be driving the RN group crazy, but the marketing group must be clapping their hands with glee, thinking, "Ooh, we get to rename or rebrand the Q Suite." I think you called it, Yusuf, as, for example, Air Canada launched Clean Care Plus, which really was a brainchild that started before the pandemic from the director of cabin maintenance, a brilliant former engineer, also a woman, and they ran with it. They made it as, they gloves, mask, individual water bottles, sanitizer wipes, et cetera, sanitizing the aircraft with aerosol. But they could rebrand those Q suites as Safety Plus or something like that. And then, yes, people are going to, let's face it, if, in Eurasia, the airlines aren't as poorly off as they are here. So I think people still have money to spend, and what countries are allowed to come into Canada or the US, they're going to keep traveling. So yeah, yes, all of that. That was brilliant. Thank you, Yusuf, for that. That's so interesting.
So if you click forward one more, Daniel, once all of this thinking is done on multiple scenarios, of course, and fed into the scheduling, so then having the ability to publish it out to all these other systems fairly quickly is something that is another essential component. So this is kind of, in a nutshell, many of the innovations that I think are being are addressing the current reality that we see in the world. And the next slide, I've got a few examples of some of the optimization tools that we just to give you a little bit more underneath a few of the tools. Of course, right sizing capacity is always a problem, and being able to quickly identify which flights are unprofitable, based on current bookings and other factors. And then having the automation, so instead of manually stepwise going through doing it, having the automation to do the swaps and put all of those unprofitable flights on one or two tails and then canceling those tails. So that's an example of something that one group requested, and it's been put into automation tool, and instead of taking a scheduler day or so to do it, it takes 5 minutes then to run this. And of course, then having the intelligent rotation optimizer for the remaining flights, that ensures that you're still honoring all of the constraints, MGTs, international to international, Schengen to Schengen in Europe, whatever it may be that is required. The maintenance on a tail basis. We've also, one group who's quite interested in OTP asked if we could schedule in fire breaks for schedule reliability. I think there was a point made earlier that even after you lock something down, you really want to have the reliability and resilience to be flexible for when changes do happen. And of course, fire breaks are the kind of resilience that the OCC group wants to see for when it happens in real time. So not all of the considerations are for the fixed schedule. I think part of the learning that we're interested in coming back from operations is what would make a more resilient schedule based on what's actually worked and not worked. The fleet assignment model, then we've found actually a number of different applications for that, from kind of the traditional refleeting to even a long-term fleet size analysis. Although they're now using that on a week-to-week basis for what fleet size it should be optimal. And you know, as requests are made, we're finding more and more ways to try to intelligently solve problems in a way that's iterative and more of a collaborative work process between groups. Any questions on these?
Yeah, Gary.
Yeah, on the acronym. Sorry, on the acronyms, DDA. What does DDA mean again?
Oh, demand-driven adjustments to the
Thank
schedule.
you.
Yeah.
And
sorry.
MGT?
Minimum ground time.
Ah, cool.
Yeah, I found that in addition to all the three-letter codes that you have to know to live in this world, there are at least as many other three-letter acronyms and they're kind of department specific. So that's part of the language, I think, learning that needs to go on even within airlines.
Yeah, and actually inter-airlines, like at Air Canada, we would have called it minimum downtime, not GT. So that I didn't recognize, but a lot of them are industry-wide, and some of them are, like you said, specific to a department or an airline. And someone had raised their hand, so I'm going to stop talking.
Yeah, even you have a question.
Yeah, Gary, just quickly on the smart rotations in the middle. That's really interesting to me. What can you speak a little bit about how some of those inputs come, say, from other systems? For example, we use one application for gating. We use another application for FAM. All of these inputs. Can you speak a little bit about how you gather all those bits of data and put them into the model?
Yeah, we've set up kind of a file-based system to have the rules engine use, so that it's quite flexible. I mean, it's almost impossible to create a hardwired optimizer that would fit more than one airline. And so whatever kind of inputs you may put into your, let's take gates, for example. We would have a file or a table that would take the particular constraints by gate, adjacency rules, whatever is important, and then the optimizer would use those rules as it tests different combinations until it creates a solution that works and meets all of the rules. So it's essentially bringing the gate management capability from a separate tool then and integrating it into the scheduling system. And the same then would be true for fleet assignment. It's essentially taking And at this point, it's not all the same level of detail that you probably have in your fleet assignment model, but for most airlines, it's high enough level, but sufficient to essentially give them the fleet assignment result that they need. And for airlines that have some of these other tools, we found by having this capability in the scheduling system to get you 95% of the way there, it really takes a lot of the pressure off the other downstream group. So that's one of the goals. I don't know, Evan, does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. The gating piece came to my mind because in American Airlines case, some of our hubs are so constrained, or at least when we're flying a full schedule, are so constrained that even changes within 5 minutes can disrupt our gating plan.
Right.
And so, you know, you talked a lot about that feedback between the airports. The airport constraints probably are one of our biggest challenges, whether it's gating or slots. And so it's really one of the things that we struggle with the most.
Oh, well, we'll have to
Yusuf,
check.
you also have a question about it.
Yep. So my question, I have a two-part question, but first it's really about everyone. When you say everyone, do you mean the network planning scheduling team, or are you making this available to the operation side of the airline also?
When the system is set up, it's usually something that the scheduling team has primary use of. But you know, we typically set it up with a multi-user license so that the ops team can actually log in and see what they may need to see, and there's a variety of different permissions that allow them to do certain things with certain schedules and to see certain reports. Well, the scheduling team may be able to do everything. Network planning as well, they may have access to scenarios with some things that they want to do and some tools. So yeah, that's a nice thing about cloud native applications is you can set up these different permissions and make it accessible. So it's got multiple uses for multiple different groups.
So, and one kind of follow on, and it connects to something that Evan asked earlier. When you said booking data, do you mean that's revenue management driven data, or is it PSS driven data?
And what is now usually set up as an API from the PSS.
Okay.
But certainly, I think there is work to be done to have a tighter integration with what revenue management would like to be able to do and the PSS data and the schedule. You know, that's kind of a direction that makes a lot of sense to go.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Sure. Okay. Maybe next slide. This gets back to a question Kristen asked earlier. You know, naturally, with any new idea or new system, the biggest barrier often is the history. And you know, in the airline industry, actually, I think it's been our experience where any IT change has been a big project, expensive, requires a lot of people. You know, a lot of testing requires, you know, it has a risk of errors, et cetera. And so change is something that I think people, when they're very busy already, would just rather not have to deal with. There's also organizational protection of your data, you know, some comfort by users of the screen that I know and know how to use and really don't want to change, et cetera, et cetera. And so the process of change management is something that is quite important to take into account very early in the process. And what we found successful is to pick a shared pain point. The maintenance example I gave you before is a good case, or the gates for Hawaiian was just tied up in knots with their gates, and being able to set up the system quickly, and to have experts work directly with the users, not just train them on the software, but have them work side by side with the users. And of course, today that can happen remotely. Solve it quickly really changes the mindset. Once people see that there is a success, and that it really added real value in terms of taking away a pain point or saving a lot of time or cost, mitigating errors, then there's a lot more willingness to expand from there into other problem areas. And so that's kind of been our what a friend of mine likes to call the nose under the tent flap approach. Once you get in with one problem, you're in the tent, and then you can work on a lot of other problems. So I'd be curious, Kristen, you brought this up. What's been your experience with change management?
So it's funny, as you were saying this, I was kind of laughing to myself because I implemented, well, I did not implement. I, along with hundreds of others, implemented a new ERP called Trax between 2009 and 2013, I guess, to replace an in-house built system that had been patchworked over time. And I watched people go through the struggle, and even just the facial expressions of fear or doubt or skepticism. As a technical writer, I from the get-go was using SGML, and we went to HTML. And I'm laughing because I remember, basically, to use really silly language, I pulled a hissy fit when I realized I was going to have to learn a new language. And it was very similar. It was not that difficult. It wasn't about I have to learn something new, because I'm all about that. But it was, I'm really good at this. I'm going to look stupid because I don't know how to do this kind of thing. So pushing, change on people, or helping people accept change versus accepting it yourself are two very, very different things. And it was a really good reminder. And I wish I'd done it in the reverse order and had a more recent experience of I myself having to accept change. And it's difficult. It's especially in the aviation, if someone's been around for longer than 5 years, basically, because it is such a volatile industry, as has been proven out this year. You have experienced so much that you have doubt where, no, this new thing can't work, or no, we tried it like this and it didn't work because of this. We all need to shut it and just listen to the person talking and listen to them suggest their idea, and be able to run all of these scenarios through these models. You can prove out something that I myself, who am obviously not technical, I was only at the cusp of learning AI and NLP and machine learning and things like that. And I asked two of my business intelligence peoples to create a model out of something that I've been trying to prove for months. And it was only once they were able to, they just did a web focus report, but it just showed what I was trying to explain in much more intelligent language. So then I could then show it to one of the, our managers and say, this is what I meant. So all of these things, once you learn to embrace what it can do for you, the sky's the limit. Again, pardon the pun.
Right. I think the starting point, though, does have to be something that's a real pain. Yes. Otherwise, people aren't willing to even go that far. But once they've experienced it, then the mindset opens up, and it takes less of a pain to be willing to consider changing. Until then, people start looking for things that they can change to improve. So that's kind of the cultural shift that you aim for, and it does take holding people's hands through those first few to get them to do it.
Or dragging them through.
Well, that's another way. Yes. Yeah. Okay, Daniel, click on the next one. Of course, probably the toughest nut to crack on the next slide is the CFO's heart. And what we found with software as a service, or really almost any IT change, is that there are kind of two major types of parts to the business case. Of course, there's the cost of the system, But then there's the savings from whatever you're using now, you know, and we've worked all the way from people using Excel to you know, major legacy systems. Of course, eliminating the cost of Excel is fairly small. That's mainly people's time or work level. Eliminating the cost of a older system could be more than the annual cost of the new system. So that may be the payback all by itself. Then, of course, there's the innovation, the upgrades, and the higher productivity as we follow the waterfall curve up. Usually by this point, you're able to quantify sufficient savings in time and in cost to more than pay for a system. But if you can click forward one more, Daniel, where the real benefit, I think, of both the new technology and the new mindset come from are some of the added value of even just one or two errors that get eliminated that might have happened, or one or two commercial opportunities that are captured because of the flexibility of demand-driven planning, are huge. You know, we've had some reports back, speaking of an error, one group, just by using the slot module, was able to find that if they'd continued doing what they were doing, they were at risk of losing a valuable slot due to the 80-20 rule that was probably worth about $12 million to them. You know, and other groups have found ways to use demand-driven planning, gate management, et cetera, to really optimize profit, you know, way beyond what the I guess, quantitative cost versus cost savings piece of a business case may be. Now, it takes a little bit of discussion, and it's a different way of thinking for most CFOs to address these probabilistic value elements. But I think this is where, again, using ranges of what it could be and the likelihood, you can show them the curve for the new system and what it could be worth to them versus what it's costing them and the risk with their current way of doing things. And they can see by comparison, you know, what it's worth. So it's less trying to forecast precisely a payback and much more around a comparative analysis of what's probable to happen with new technology. Any questions or comments on this? No? Okay. Well, the last slide to kind of wrap things up is where I think we're really interested in heading is back to this learning from what actually happened. And I think there's a huge amount of data in operation systems, in the customer facing groups on, you know, what actually is the feedback from what has actually happened that we could learn from, whether that's as simple as creating more automation to save time, ways to save more money or enhance the efficiency of the operation, or for resilient schedule design. I think this is where the, I guess, the benefit of machine learning, I think, has a lot of promise, because it can look across multiple types of data sets and give you some insights that aren't obvious from a traditional data analytics approach. So that's kind of a future direction. I know everybody's thinking of it, and what our goal is to then be able to utilize that data in the inputs to these fast, flexible, demand-driven scheduling processes.
In one of the earlier sessions, we discussed how probable it is that the way airlines are scheduling today with long-term orientation, creating the SSIM file for the over next season and putting it in the GDS and so on, and that everything is now very much short notice. So what is your sense on that? Will airlines really issue seasons so way ahead, or will travel become more and more short notice? And that's true for also the crew scheduling later on, because people have to ad hocly plan to going abroad and not with a long-term orientation anymore.
Sure. I think that certainly the market will tell us that, but even if it becomes more predictive or predictable, I think airlines are going to find a lot of benefit from having the flexibility to make major adjustments to capture market opportunities and to deal with situations within the time frame when their seasonal schedule used to be locked down. Now, how IATA is going to handle that, actually, I'd like to ask Yusuf. He's our expert on IATA slots. I have no idea. I think they're in for a shock. And I don't know if they have created a solution yet.
So, Gary, that's why I raised my hand. Let me first of all say that there's a big difference of opinion between different people. When this crisis first started, I'm not part of the CIS group anymore, but I used to be. And so I contacted the people I know. I contacted the chairman of the 2 teams I work with over there. And I said, guys, this is going to radically change how we do our business. The same old rules of summer 20 and then winter 21 and winter 20 aren't going to work anymore. And they said, no, this is only temporary. In a year or two, everything will go back to normal. You're just creating alarm. We don't want to make any changes. So I'm in the group that thinks that way of working has gone out the window. And if you think that we're going to be able to do the same thing again, it will not survive. And I'll give you a couple of data points on why it cannot survive. If you take how slots are being done, the way the industry is doing slots this year for the summer and probably for the winter also is going to be, well, we're going to waive the slot usage rules, but they'll come back next year. So you can do what you want now, but you can get your historics back next year. But what you're going to find is there are going to be some nimble airlines, and usually those are the low-cost carriers. Sorry if I offend anybody by saying that. We're going to jump in and say, look, we're willing to invest now. While other airlines are cutting back their schedules, we're willing to put flights in, we're willing to invest in these airports and these routes. So we should now have the rights to fly these slots and get historics. So I think the industry is headed for a very bad clash. We've got I'll call them legacy carriers again, I don't have a better name for it, who think that they'll get everything back the way they used to have it in 2019. And we've got the low-cost carriers, the ultra-low-cost carriers coming in and trying to get rights to those same slots. It's going to be very ugly. There's some people who are saying, pretend it's not a problem, it will go away by itself. I don't think it's going to go away. I think it's going to get very ugly.
Hasn't that issue already kind of come up with Wizz and London?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Wizz Air is saying we are willing to invest now. We're putting in new routes, we're putting in new flights, we're putting in new bases. If we're going to invest, we should have rights to those slots. Whereas the IATA rules, at least for this summer and probably for this winter, are no. The airlines who are giving the slots back in time, they will get them again in 2021 or 2022. So there is no way this can end nicely with the rules the way they are today.
Yeah.
So maybe they could, IATA, if someone can speak into their ear somehow, tell them, why don't you consider a short-term lease, or however you want to describe it, for a Wizz Air flying into, they're flying into Heathrow or the other London airport?
Gatwick is where they're coming the most in, but now they're saying we want Heathrow and the others as well.
Okay, so great. So while Air Canada is not using their 3 slots because we're not flying to England right now, why don't you just let Wizz Air use it? Because it's good for the economy. It's good for the entire friggin' world. So let them use it on a week-to-week basis, a 2-week basis, a 3-week, whatever, and let Air Canada know, listen, you've already planned. You're not flying in until January. So we are going to make use of those slots because the gates work for these aircraft type that this airline is flying. I'm not in the industry anymore, if they don't realize you have to be nimble, a lot of airlines are going to die. 22,000 people at Air Canada lost their job. That's one airline who is going to survive, but that's one airline. the world has to survive. And also, I was thinking of New Zealand. I think New Zealand was doing very well for a long period of, well, a longish period of time. When they start allowing people to fly in there again, because let's say that they go, I don't know, a month without a new case. So airlines consider flying in there, or they consider flying out. Same thing. Go by the science, go by the availability, go by the current short-term plans of the airline, who technically they don't own, but technically has leased that gate. They have to be nimble. And these DEA models can show them that, yes, we can all play together in the same sandbox. We can't be there at the same time. And Yusuf, you're smiling. Either I'm nuts or you understand what I'm saying.
So I think it's a complicated topic and we don't have a lot of time. But just to give you a little bit of idea, the rules are different between what Canada allows, what the US allows, what the UK allows, what Europe allows. What you're talking about is legally possible in the US. It is not legally possible, for example, in Germany. And so we don't have enough time for me to get into the rules for it. If we have another occasion where someone wants to hear about the slot rules and how it works, I'll be glad to elaborate. But even in places like Canada, airports like Toronto, this can be a very complicated issue. Imagine that I say, I'm new low-cost carrier. I want to come into Toronto. Can I have a daily 8 o'clock slot, Air Canada? And Air Canada says, I'll only give it to you for 1 year as a lease. I might say, then I'm not interested because I want to put this service in for the next 10 years. But Air Canada, if you'll give it for 10 years, then maybe I'm interested in coming in. So there's that aspect as well. Very few airlines want to invest in the infrastructure only for a short term.
Thank you, Yusuf. I think
near term or even longer, it is going to be much more flexible, and I think people are going to have to stay nimble to deal with that. And whether there's a market in slots that's created this way there's been in every other industry, instead of having a regimented season, that'll be interesting to see.
Yeah.
Daniel, thank you very much for the opportunity. I really appreciate it.
No, I think you was a great presentation. I think a lot of questions and comments, and Yusuf, you're totally right. Maybe another session shall be scheduled in the upcoming weeks. We have already further sessions scheduled this week and next week. So tomorrow we have our third Aviation Women panel. And then next week we are speaking about the integration and the bridge between airline operations and air cargo. And then the day after, we are also talking about a crew management related topic, the predictive and proactive fatigue risk management approaches in commercial aviation. So everybody who is in this area should also register for that. And if there is somebody here in the session who also wants to present something, maybe Simon, about airport related topics, just get back to me, because we believe this Virtual Ops 2020 season is going longer than expected. We have planned it initially till the end of September, but we will continue also in October, November, because as Gary said initially, it's a good opportunity for everybody while we are not capable to travel, to virtually connect, to virtually travel, and to connect with each other, and also foster the know-how in the industry, because I think there are a lot of opportunities to get to know best practice and to widen the horizon of everybody for his personal purpose and benefit. So thank you very much again. I wish you a good rest of the day, good afternoon, and please stay healthy and safe. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Daniel.
Take care.
Bye.